Welcome to the Star Chamber. I'm Ryan Swayze, a retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel and the founder and president of the Walk the Talk Foundation, a nonprofit that advocates for and advises currently serving and former military service members going through the arduous journey of administrative processes and investigations in our government.
And I am Francesca Graham, a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel and the Chief Operating Officer and Chief Advisor for the Walk the Talk Foundation. For all our returning guests, welcome back. And for our new listeners, thank you for tuning in. Before we begin this week's topic, please do not forget to hit that subscribe button, check out our Walk the Talk Foundation website, and hit that donate button if you think we're doing a good job. Also, check out our newsletter, the DoD Times Redacted, on all the socials, including LinkedIn, X, Instagram, and Facebook. Links in the description. All right, Star Chamber listeners, let's get started.
All right, welcome back to the Star Chamber. I hope you're ready for an exciting episode, like they all are. I know I am. We're going to talk about a story I've been wanting to talk about for quite some time, since I met Francesca a few months, almost a year ago now, because she's got some fascinating stories, and this is one of them. We're going to talk about, well, I'll tell you what, I'll open up with a German phrase of mine, one of my favorites. And Cheska, by the way, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Ryan. I'm so happy to be here, as normal.
You are
Best podcast in the freaking world. I tell you
that
what.
glass is so half full over there.
Oh, always.
There's a German phrase, one of my favorites. It's unter den Blinden ist der einäugige König, which literally translates to, amongst the blind is the one-eyed man king. That's exactly what we're going to be talking about today, the blind leading the blind. And as of course, as is our wheelhouse, we'll be talking about in the guise of the administration and administrative processes and investigations of the military. So way back in, 2016 or so, up shows to Spangdahlem Air Base, one Senior Major Ryan Swayze, and I guess it was more like 2013, doesn't matter. And I roll in, fresh out of school, ready to get back to the Operational Air Force. Vice Wing Commander welcomes me, goes, "Hey, Count, how's it going?" 'Cause Count was my call sign back then. I go, "Great, sir." He goes, "You want to be the Inspector General for the base?" I said,
No.
"Hell no, I don't."
Absolutely not, sir.
And he goes, "You got the job. Congrats." 5 business days later, I couldn't even spell IG prior to that. I was the IG of the base after that week of training, business week of training, 5 days. And I think we probably cut out early on Friday, so 4.5 business days.
Did you start
So I went
drinking at
from,
noon?
yeah, absolutely. And then we had lunches too. So
Obviously.
So we'll call it three solid days of training.
Uh-huh.
I went from career fighter pilot to professional investigator of an installation of about 3,500 people, leading a team of about 12 inspectors and investigators. And with that 3 days of training, I was the most trained and qualified of that group. So that's tier 2, though, in the 3-tier system of military investigations. Tier 1, the top tier, you have your criminal quasi-professional investigators. It's all relative, of course, but they are arguably the most trained and qualified. CIDs, NCISs, OSIs. Tier 2 is the Inspector General mechanism, of which I was a part of. And then there's Tier 3, the equivalent of rolling up on an Air Force base, seeing some random airmen going, "Hey, airman, you ever seen a plane before?" They go, "Sir, yes, sir." You know, "Here are the keys, go fly it." It is that equivalent. They don't know what in the F they are doing, but they're told to do it, and off they go. That's tier three. That is the investigating officer, the augmentee. Different services have different terms for it, but it is that guy or gal who's just sitting there fat, dumb, and happy, anywhere from rank O1 to O6,
And enlisted too, actually.
and enlisted.
Yeah.
Could be anybody. Literally be literally, quite literally anyone.
Because it's just off a
No,
roster, alphabetized
no
roster.
exaggeration. Yes. You could show up to work and there's an equal chance that you would be selected for a random urinalysis as the chances of you getting selected to become an investigating officer. That's how this system rolls. If it's any consolation, though, that investigation could have long-lasting, hard-hitting impacts for the subject and the complainant, and it's all carried out by some random yahoo. So, speaking of yahoos,
Hey.
oh, what the? There's a story, Cheska, that especially me, and that was when you were selected off of a list of names to be the investigating officer for a very high level, high visibility, politically charged investigation down at Fort Hood, now Fort Cavazos. True?
True.
All right, so walk us through what that was about, how you came to be an investigating officer for that, and some of the startling, perhaps, takeaways you had from that experience.
Well, thank you, Ryan. So, similar to you, I was at work and my boss pulled me into the office and told me that I was selected to be on General Carilla's investigating team to go do an investigation of one of the large organizations down at, I'll just say Fort Hood. And I was told that this is one exception when I was not just randomly picked off a roster, although previous investigations I was randomly picked off a roster. I was told that I was going to be the lead writer for this team, where General Carilla was the actual IO, and then he had a bunch of people with him because it was a division size element that we were investigating. And somewhat funny and somewhat relevant, during the course of the investigation, I had the unfortunate and fortunate curse of being the hardest working person on the team, and apparently one of the more reliable ones. And so went from being the lead writer, and I was also one of the more junior ones. I went from being the lead writer to deputy ops to deputy investigating officer, back to deputy ops, back to the lead analysis person for line of inquiry number one, which was the largest, most ridiculously huge line of inquiry of the five that were there, and then back to the lead writer.
Wow. You got like promoted 3 times
I got promoted and demoted, but
and then demoted
and
and then
then
promoted
demoted.
again. That's
Um,
good.
and all of it with absent any training relevant to any of the positions. I think if you could say what's the only position that I was naturally trained for would be the deputy ops, because I've done ops stuff throughout my whole career. But being the lead writer for a massive investigation, I initially, when I was told, I was a little bit annoyed because I thought, I was like, oh yeah, typical. They picked a woman to be the secretary.
Oh,
I know.
come on, Army.
Oh,
Come on.
it's Fort Bragg though. But anyways, but I
Hmm.
had never done it before, so I didn't know. And then once I did, I was like, good Lord, this is insane.
Okay, so let's back up a little bit here.
Yep.
So when you're told you're going to be the investigating on the team,
Mhm.
essentially, were you told what it concerned?
Yes, so we were told that it concerned, so this is going back to why there were investigations going down at Fort Hood at that time. So Specialist Vanessa Guillen, about a year or so prior, she had been at Fort Hood, she had been violently murdered, and there were, over the course of her murder plus the inadequate response of her chain of command. There were a number of investigations and special task forces that went to Fort Hood to specifically figure out if this was a Specialist Guillen unit issue or if this were a larger issue on Fort Hood itself.
Okay.
And the conclusion of these different investigations was that, well, not only was this a Fort Hood issue with some of the units there on Fort Hood, but also there are a lot of systemic issues in the Army itself dealing specifically with the way that we inadequately handled sexual assault, sexual harassment.
What?
I know.
Look at everyone's shocked face out there in podcast land.
Yeah, I think one
Okay,
of
so
the,
you're
go ahead.
so you're told this is going to be a holistic type of cultural, essentially, investigation
Yep.
led by what was the name and rank again?
Three-star Lieutenant
Three star.
Lieutenant
Okay.
General Carrilla, who's now
Okay.
four-star. He's the CENTCOM commander currently.
Okay.
Central Command.
All right. So that's the framework and the context of you heading down there, and then you head down there, and you're promoted, demoted based on your competence of that day, I guess, or
Well,
or
and
as people
even
quit.
and even prior to us getting there, so we as a team, I think it was about 20 or so different people, mixture of officer enlisted, all senior ranking-ish. I think the most junior officer was fours. I think there were three O4s in the team, and then several E9s and E8s and E7s, and then O6s and O5s and whatnot. So prior to even going down there, we were sequestered away for about 2 weeks in this facility to prepare ourselves and prepare our questions and read all the material. And one of the things that, I didn't understand at the time was an issue, but now doing this work with the foundation, seeing all this stuff as a huge issue, is that the training that we received and the regulations that we were told to read and the specialists that were on our team, none of them were actually investigators of
Right.
anything. The
Right.
only training we received was on EO, equal opportunity, and then sexual assault, sexual harassment, like what those means, what the regulations were, and we were given prior investigations to look at, but nothing about here's how to conduct an investigation. Here's, especially if you're dealing with someone who, during the course of that investigation, reveals that they were a sexual assault victim or a sexual harassment victim. The farthest that we went on any of that training is that if during the course of investigations or interview someone says I was a sexual assault victim, stop the interview, refer them to CID. That's the farthest we went,
Okay.
which is which
Uh,
even that in and of itself is a little bit conflicted because now you're like, all right, I'm not talking to you anymore. Person that just established trust. I'm not
yeah.
going to talk with you anymore. Go talk to these random people over here that apparently you haven't wanted to talk to up until now, anyways.
Yeah. You can trust us though, honest.
Yeah.
So, all right. So we'll pause it there because this is why we're talking about this on the show, because it's not a Fort Hood Army centric issue. This is something we see throughout the services is that the majority, in fact, of investigations, regardless of if they're intaked at the Inspector General office or the Equal Opportunity office, just from my experience and statistics also would show that about 90% of complaints that go to the IG, the Inspector General office, are actually referred to command, and the command is then responsible for investigating those allegations.
Yep.
And that's because the investigative lane of the IG office is very narrow: restriction, reprisal, fraud, waste, and abuse, abuse of authority in some cases. But the vast majority of complaints don't have anything to do with that. They're unfair rating assessments or inappropriate relationships or yada, yada, yada. So those get punted back to the command of in the organization that they're occurring. In those instances, which I'd say is anywhere 70 to 90% of complaints, those instances are then investigated by a person who just magically becomes an investigating officer, who has no professional training, no know-how, probably no experience, and they're at best given a slide deck to review,
Not even.
maybe a few words of wisdom, and then they're sent on their way to vet these complaints, something that you didn't even get Francesca, in your case?
Yeah, and I think for mine, like when we arrived down at Fort Hood, I think we had been down there for a couple of days, and the day before, day or day and a half before interviews were supposed to start, was when I was told that General Carrillo wanted me to be one of the deputy investigating officers.
I don't mean to laugh because this is a serious issue, but that's ridiculous. So I had to
Yeah.
laugh. And that's the other side of the coin here, which is the gravity of some of these investigations can't really be overstated. People's lives, careers, mental and psychological well-being are all on the line during these times and these processes and these inquiries and these investigations. Just like Fort Hood, so too does it occur every day throughout the military in smaller scales with individual cases who have been quote unquote referred to command to be investigated by these amateurs. Not saying, of course, Cheska, you're an amateur,
No, but
but
I am.
in the guise of an investigation,
I
you
am.
were. And you hold, as an investigating officer, quite literally people's lives and careers in your hands.
Mhm.
And that's why it's so frightening. And then you extrapolate that to Francesca's walking us through right now, which is a very hard hitting investigation, or should have been, about not only culture of a unit, but of a base and potentially an entire service. All right, so you show up to Fort Hood. Are you given any restrictions on what you can discuss, i.e., an NDA at any point?
Yeah, we were actually, even before we left Fort Bragg, now Fort Liberty, we were given NDAs about not discussing the details of the investigation, which of course I will not discuss the details of the investigation during the podcast. But one of the things, going back to what you were just now saying, hard hitting investigation. So one of the major things that was happening in the world at the same time that this investigation was occurring, and one of the reasons why it specifically was so hard hitting, was this was during the time frame when Congress was debating, and the DoD was fighting, Department of Defense was fighting against taking decisions to investigate sexual assault away from
Mm,
commanders.
mm,
And at the higher levels, this investigation was going to be something that impacted the DoD's ability to argue that to Congress, and also
mm,
Congress's perspective of, are you doing the right thing or not? So
mm,
I don't know, and I'm certainly not going to speak on General Carrillo's behalf or General Garrett's behalf, who was the four-star in charge overall,
mm.
of how that impacted how they ultimately said the investigation went. But those were just atmospherics that were going on, which is pretty significant.
Yeah, and obviously the chapter two of that story is that the DoD lost that argument, and some, I think, erroneously say that the chain of command has been taken out of the sexual assault prosecution process. But of course, it still exists within the military, so it's still within a chain of command. It's an important
Well, and
distinction.
then also, like we've seen with other of our clients, if the chain of command doesn't even report the sexual assault, it's whether it gets investigated or not is a null, no,
Right.
is a
Yeah,
null.
we're
It
like,
doesn't matter.
all right, we'll see your legislation and raise you one.
Right. We just won't
Yeah.
even report it.
It
Easy.
didn't even exist. Nothing to see here.
Easy.
Okay. So, did you at any point feel, or did you see at any point that there were conclusions that were going to be out of bounds, or conclusions that you were, wink, wink, encouraged to reach?
Yes. So there were actually two two points during the investigation when I got very direct, which at least at work, I'm a very direct person. In my personal
Hmm.
life, I'm not as direct as I should be. But it's
Hi, Mom, by the way.
a lifelong problem. But anyways, so the first one was when we were, so if you look at the statistics of sexual harassment, sexual assault, the across the Department of Defense, the vast majority of reported sexual harassment, sexual assault is from your E6 and below ranks, which makes sense because that's the largest population that exists in the force. Certainly within
Mhm.
the Army, I'm not sure Air Force, but I would imagine it's still the largest population.
Yeah.
And so there's this bias that can be very easily reached that the issue of sexual assault, sexual harassment is at the E6 and below rank, and that the more senior officers or more senior enlisted are somehow immune or somehow not immune from being the victim of or are not perpetrators of. And that was very much that was the first significant thematic argument that I saw being made that I felt incredibly uncomfortable with because I just knew it to be false from personal experience. And so and I know it kind of shocked General Carrillo, was when we were on our flight back to from Fort Hood back to Fort Bragg, I took a piece of lined paper and I wrote on it every single, rank from second lieutenant through to major, which I was at the time 04, so 01 to 04. And I just listed off for him, not names, of course, but the ranks that I could remember of all the times I had been sexually harassed and then the one time that I'd been sexually assaulted. And every single rank that was on there was E7 or above or 04 and above. So it was always the senior people, certainly who are being predatory. And when I was sexually assaulted, it was an 05. So it's always the senior people that were being predatory on certainly me. And then when I spoke with a number of the senior NCOs that were there, women, they had the same experience. It was always seniors who were predators against them. And so one of the things that so we say statistically it's E6 and below, but the fact of the matter is the E6s and below, is there stuff happening? Yes, of course. Are they being allowed to do these things? Absolutely. By the very same leadership who's being predatory at their own level, certainly against me,
Mm-hmm.
certainly against all the E9s. Every single of the E9 women that was there had the same experience, starting off from basic training through. So so both of these instances are what I would call officer protectionism,
Hmm.
which really just absolutely infuriates me. So that was the first one. And General Carrillo's response, he looked at it, he kind of shook his head north south and then folded the paper and gave it back to me. And that was, I think, he didn't address it. We didn't have another conversation about it, but he certainly knew where I stood. And I was like, sir, because I wrote at the bottom of the note, I'm like, sir, we cannot, as officers, try to blame our subordinates for the things that we're doing,
Mm-hmm.
but we can just hide it better because we're the ones in charge of the investigations.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Slash non-disclosure agreements.
slash non-disclosure agreements. And then the second, more blatant, I don't want to say more blatant, but along the same line. So I was going back to when I became the person who was charged with doing the assessment of, given all the data we had collected, all the interviews, all this stuff, take all of that information and analyze it in the context of line of inquiry number one, which was the largest line of inquiry. And so I did my analysis. One of my brothers was actually staying with me at the time, and I'm still up at like 3 o'clock in the morning. He's like, "Dude, go to bed." I'm like, I can't. I have so much data. And anyway, so I do the analysis, and from that analysis, and it was a massive amount of data, surveys, all this. I mean, just massive amount of data. And from that, I'm looking at it. I'm like, hey, to me, it looks like there's X number of O5 command level and O3 command level who are not following policy regulation in regards to, as I understand it, for sexual harassment, sexual assault, reporting, protections, policies, so on and so forth. So I go and I brief this to the team prior to getting to General Carrillo. And one of the O6s on the team, who is a sitting brigade commander, he tries to start pushing back on me. He says, "No, Francesca, you have that all wrong. And, I think that, I talked with these guys and every single one of them supports the program." And I was like, "Well, sir, what do you mean by that?" And he says, "Well, they all have the policies and they all support the program." And I said to him, I was like, "Sir, I can tell you I run a 6-minute mile. I don't. I never have.
Mm-hmm.
I never will."
Mm-hmm.
Proof is in the pudding. And so I briefed that to General Carrillo. This other O6 or this O6 was still being pretty adamant to General Carrillo. "Well, sir, I think that Major Graham's data is, wrong. She's not doing the analysis correctly. She's all this other stuff, right?" And then after the briefing, this '06 comes up to me and says, "Hey, Francesca, so I know you've done all the work. I really appreciate it, but I'm going to take line of inquiry number 1 from you, and I'll do the analysis of it, and I'll do the write-up for General." And I said, "No, sir, I'm fine. I don't need any help, but I really appreciate it."
I'm good.
And he says, "No, Major Graham, I'm going to take it." And I said, "Well, why, sir?" He says, "Well, I can tell that you're just really tired and you've been working really long nights and you look a little bit overwrought." And he says, "And your temper's getting a little bit tight there, jagged edges." That's what I get told I have sometimes, jagged edges. And he says, "So yeah, so I'm gonna take that from you." And I said, "Sir, you're not taking it from me. General Carrillo assigned it to me, and I'm keeping it." And he looks at me and he points. Army, we wear a rank in the middle of our chest on their uniform, on a utility uniform. He puts his thumb underneath his '06 bird eagle. He pulls it out. He looks down at it. He says, "Oh, I'm sorry. Am I confused? Did I get that wrong? Am I not an '06 anymore?" And I looked at him. I was like, "Sir, you don't have to remind me what you are. I know what you are, but I'm not giving you LOI number 1." And he didn't get it because General Kurilla wouldn't give it to him. Or he didn't even ask General Kurilla. I don't know which one. He probably didn't even ask. But yeah, so the officer protectionism ran deep, very
Yeah,
deep. And I
and
think it was all related to what I said earlier in the political context of taking this stuff away from commanders.
yeah, and so that's why I bring the question up is because when throughout the military, whatever the scenario is, when it goes to these investigations where the command is responsible for investigating itself, which in and of itself is hilarious, they get some lackey, and no disparagement, of course, to any investigating officer, but they're not qualified, they're not trained. And then the third issue is that they're susceptible slash very easily coerced because they are subordinate to that command element that's overseeing the investigation, the same command element that controls their performance rating, their assessment, their next assignment, their promotion, etc. It is
I was susceptible, but I didn't give in.
damn right.
But that happened in my previous investigation too, when I was a investigating officer in Korea. I showed up, I had been there a month, not even. I was made the investigating officer for against a complaint against an '03. I was made the IO by the brigade commander, who was my senior rater. The brigade commander was the one that made the complaint against the '03.
Awesome.
I did the investigation. I found that did the '03 do something stupid? Yes, but was it intentionally being bad or, no, it was just something stupid. There was nothing, disrespectful. He just made a mistake. And it wasn't even like a serious, it was just a stupid mistake, right? So my investigation came back with, well, I think the '03 did, made a mistake, but nothing, no dereliction of duty, no conduct unbecoming, none of that crap. And the brigade commander, I would say, was not terribly pleased.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. So that there's a formula for success. Um, but it's not to be crass, or perhaps to be a little crass, is that the system has been designed quite masterfully when you think about it, because we have this mechanism now in the military, which serves two purposes. Number one, it dupes any onlooker to think it's actually fair and just and independent, which it is not.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, it serves to fulfill the aims, intents, desires of the command team that wants to achieve a foregone conclusion. So it's the same issue in that regard as the Inspector General system itself, which just has this veneer of independence and integrity, but is really just another extension of the undue influences of the command arm.
Do you want to know something funny?
Oh, absolutely.
I don't think I've told you this before.
Hit me.
Guess who was our lead JAG at the Corps?
Lead JAG at the Corps. I don't know.
Colonel Warren Wells.
I'll be damned. Yeah, and if you don't know his name, you can Google it because he's made the news. All right, so there you are. you've held on, you have held your ground,
Mm-hmm.
and the investigation and report is completed. You fly back to Bragg slash Liberty. Kind of talk us through in big picture sense what you saw or didn't see, the outcomes of that investigation and report from a Fort Hood centric perspective as well as Army centric, and then also like how you were changed as a person slash officer from that experience.
So I think Fort Hood Army perspective, and this is I'm not trying to be cynical when I say this. I think the major things that changed were new GS positions were developed and new offices were opened. And yeah, I don't, I mean, especially given, my recent experience in this world, I don't, I don't see that the recommendations from a cultural perspective, from a leadership perspective, took. I think that the recommendations from a bureaucratic money spending perspective, which is the easy part, that those
Mhm.
recommendations took, because then just like you said earlier, you can tell Congress you've done all these things and it's something that you can actually assess easily.
Mhm. Yeah.
Whereas assessing cultural changes are not quite as easy, but are more important, certainly.
Not to mention, to have cultural solutions, you have to admit there were cultural issues slash leadership issues, something our department is very averse to doing.
Yeah, it's very much of a that old saying, do the harder right even when no one's looking. That is so
Mm.
that is there. I mean, obviously there are people that do that. Certainly, I mean, not everyone's terrible. There's a lot of wonderful people out there, but there's so many people who just don't do it, and then so many of those people are in higher ranks. I mean, I remember when I was down at Fort Hood, this is just a small little thing, but this investigation happened when COVID was still pretty new, and so we were all wearing face masks and all this stuff and the distancing and everything. And I'm walking out of one of the buildings after doing an interview, walking back to my vehicle to drive back to where our place was. And I see this group of non-commissioned officers, and I see the first sergeant, so E8, and then some junior NCOs around them. And all of them had their masks off, which was not in accordance with policy. And I'm just walking forward, and they can see my maroon beret, and so they know I'm one of the investigators, and they can see the shiny thing, so they know I'm an officer. And the first sergeant's looking right towards me, and right as I almost get up there, the first sergeant puts his mask on and then tells everyone else to put their mask on. And so I pull the first sergeant aside, and I was like, "Hey, first sergeant, why'd you put your mask up when I was walking up to you?" "Well, ma'am, ma'am." And he just kind of started stuttering a little bit. And I was like, "First sergeant, so," I was like, "You know what you just did, right?" I said, "First of all, you just made me look like the enemy to those junior NCOs, because now it's because of that blah 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 that we have to do this stupid blah 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 blah. And then also you just compromised yourself with a total lack of discipline in front of your juniors, your subordinate non-commissioned officers, and they know that they've got you now." He's like, "Well, ma'am, well, ma'am." So there's a lot of only, and the DOD, when does the DOD change? You've said this. When
Not of their own volition.
not of their own volition, when the
Yeah.
press is looking at him, and when or writing stories, and when Congress is looking at him. And even then they'll only change a quarter of an inch,
Yeah.
maybe. And it might be
Yeah.
backwards.
Just to
Like,
appease. Yeah.
right. And it might be backwards by appointing Warren Wells as the head of the Office of Special Investigations. No big deal. But anyways, and then so how did that change me as a person? Honestly, I was incredibly, I'm a very, as we've alluded to numerous times in the show, I'm a very optimistic, rose-colored glasses type of person, because
Hmm. Yes.
it's a strong, more than anything, it's a self-protection mechanism, because I don't like being depressed, because
Hmm.
that's just lame.
Hmm.
And but I was genuinely frustrated and disappointed with the really truly concerted officer protectionism that I saw going on. It
Hmm.
really, really bothered me.
Hmm.
And then the other thing that was impressed upon me is that if you are someone who does their best consistently, which I feel like I try to do that, that you do create a level of trust with people. So of the whole team that was there, the whole investigative team, the last, we got back to brag, and then it was the writing portion. Everyone's supposed to be writing, and no one's really writing, and it's just stupid. And and the last like 3 weeks, 4 weeks, every single day, General Kurilla called me and had me in his office, and we were going it over and over and all the changes and all this and all that. And I just found that to be very interesting because I think my guess is that he trusted that I was not trying to, I was one of the few people on the team that didn't have ulterior motives
Huh.
for whatever
Okay.
it was. And so
Yeah.
I would be straight with him, which I always was straight with him. And I told him like, sir, I don't agree with that, or sir, I agree with whatever, and I'll do whatever it is.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because about the same time frame, I guess a few years prior to this, was I was overseeing our first really contentious inspection within the wing as a relatively new inspector general, and it was the wing's fighter squadron, whose pilots raised several concerns about safety of flight and discipline and whatnot. When I went to brief the wing commander, of course, hires his subordinate ops group commander, who he in turn has hired the squadron commander, who's now under the gun, told to change the results of the report and the overall rating and grade, which I did not.
Mm-hmm.
And then he just did it anyways. So you talk about officer protectionism, yeah, slash nepotism,
Mm-hmm.
because we hire the people we like and then we have to protect them. And if we're given the choice, the proverbial we here between truth and doing the right thing or doing right by ourselves, which was kind of smacks of the episode we just did on the not me movement. Uh, Most leaders, unfortunately, will typically opt to do right by themselves and uh, and their nepotistic circle. And it sounds like this investigation was no different.
I mean, there were attempts certainly, because but one of the other psychological factors that kept getting being brought up to me, especially by because when I was, what was it, in 2012, I transitioned to strategic intelligence from basic intelligence, which meant that I was out of I took myself voluntarily out of the command path, so battalion command, brigade command. And my reason for doing that was because I had been so badly sexually harassed and sexually assaulted up to that point that I was like, well, maybe if I work at the more senior headquarters level, I can continue to serve in an army that I love and not have to deal with that all the time. So that's
Ha
why I
ha
did
ha,
that.
you
Yeah,
silly, silly girl,
I
you.
know. But anyways, so one of the psychological things that consistently was coming up when I was having some of these conversations about, hey, here's what the data is showing. The people who had been in command, more senior level commands than I had, were prone, not all of them, but were prone to giving the commanders a pass because they were saying, well, they kept talking about the weight of command. Well, the weight of command is so large, and you wouldn't understand it, and you can't control everything and all this other stuff. And one of our mentors, who was retired one star, who's I really respect, when he heard someone saying that, not to me, but in general, he heard someone saying that, and he was very senior ranking commander when he retired. He called BS on every single one of the people that were saying that. He was like, no, you're not giving anybody a pass from the weight of command. The weight of command exists, and you volunteered for it, and it's your responsibility, period. But it's one of those psychological things that, especially if you have a commander doing an investigation of another command, they're going to be like, well, I can understand why you're having all these issues. And so they'll start giving people a pass.
Yeah. Yeah, and the exchange you talk about highlights one of the three facets we introduce, which is you just have a bunch of unqualified, unadulterated opinions getting thrown back and forth. It's like, well, I see the data as this, well, I see the data as this, and neither are qualified in that field of study to really make an assertion with any kind of expertise. And that brings us full circle to the problem we introduced at the beginning of the show, which is the vast majority of investigations are overseen/conducted by people who shouldn't be doing investigations because they're not qualified to do them, not only from a training and experience standpoint, but also from a conflict of interest standpoint. So the takeaway, I think, for all this is from a foundation-centric standpoint, if you find yourself as the subject or complainant of an issue, of an investigation, which is being overseen or run by the command you are in, you need to call us, like right away.
You need to be afraid.
Because, Cheska, how many times have we heard, they got nothing on me, I'm clean, I'm going to be fine, and lo and behold, they ain't.
They end up in confinement.
Yeah, exactly. You got to call us. That's just a shameless plug for the foundation. However, as with every podcast, we kind of aim to send a takeaway out, and that is this, is that many, many, many administrative investigations are done quite poorly, quite amateurly. We can say that statistically beyond a shadow of a doubt.
Yep.
And you need to be sure you're protecting yourself because nobody else is. Cheska, parting words.
Last parting word. Other thing that is always a huge issue, was not an issue for us, is the vast majority of your command-appointed investigating officers, they still have their day job. So they are trying to rush through that investigation as quickly as possible so they can get back to their day job, which is what they're actually rated on.
True that. All right, so be aware. Be very aware. All right, great show as always. Cheska, thanks for sharing your story. That was fascinating. You can read more on our website, and a few other articles have come out, co-authored by us, authored by us, and in the press about that investigation, about the outcomes, ramifications, and we're still seeing from friends and compatriots of the foundation, we're still seeing the after effects of that years-long, dare I say, scandal. So read more about it. Great show. We'll see you on the flip side.
Have a great week.
Bye.
Well, that's it for this week's topic. We really appreciate you tuning in. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and check out our foundation website at walkthetalkfoundation.org.
And feel free to reach out and give us feedback. You can get a hold of us via Facebook, X, Instagram, LinkedIn, and our foundation's website. Details in the description section. Thanks for tuning in, and see you next episode.